What if I told you that most people don't actually reach a net worth of $100,000 until their late 30s or early 40s? Shocking, right? Especially in a world where Instagram and YouTube are full of 22-year-olds posing next to Lamborghinis, sipping champagne, and calling themselves self-made millionaires. But if you look past the noise and check the real numbers, you'll see a very different story. Let's break it down. The Federal Reserve, the US central bank that tracks household wealth every few years, publishes something called the Survey of Consumer Finances. It's one of the most reliable snapshots of what Americans actually have, not just what they say they have online. And according to their most recent report, households under the age of 35 have a median net worth of around $39,000. Median means the middle point. Half of young households have more than that, half have less. Not exactly millionaire status, right? Now, compare that to households aged 35 to 44. The median net worth jumps to about $135,000. That's where most people finally cross that magical six-figure milestone. Not in their 20s, not even in their early 30s, but closer to 40. So why does it take that long? Let's peel this back. First, we've got to clear up what net worth even means. It's simple math. Everything you own minus everything you owe. That includes savings accounts, retirement funds, home equity, cars, and even business interests, minus your debts like student loans, car loans, mortgages, and credit cards. Sounds straightforward, but here's the tricky part. A lot of what people count as wealth doesn't actually grow on its own. For example, your car might technically be an asset, but it's a depreciating one. It loses value every year you own it. Compare that to an index fund or retirement account that compounds over time, and you'll see the big difference between owning stuff and building wealth. Now, here's the part nobody really talks about. In your 20s, it's almost normal to have a negative net worth. Why? Because of debt. According to the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, student loan debt in the US is over $1.6 trillion, and young adults carry a big chunk of it. Add in credit card balances, car loans, and sky-high rents, and it's easy to see why the average 25-year-old isn't stacking six figures in their bank account. Think of it like this. When you're starting out, you're not running a sprint toward wealth. You're climbing out of a financial hole. Your first few years are about getting back to zero, paying off student loans, figuring out rent, and hopefully avoiding the kind of credit card debt that quietly eats away at your future. But once you hit your 30s, the story begins to change. By then, careers usually start to stabilize. Entry-level jobs turn into mid-level ones, incomes rise, and debts begin to shrink. Maybe those student loans are finally gone, or at least under control. And suddenly, there's breathing room. You can save, you can invest, you can actually see the snowball starting to form. Let's take a real-world example. Say someone in their 20s is making $40,000 a year. They're living in a city, paying rent, and chipping away at $30,000 in student loans. At this stage, their net worth is probably close to zero, or negative. Fast forward to their mid-30s, now they're earning $70,000 or $80,000 a year. The student loans are mostly paid off, and they've been putting money into a 401k or IRA for a few years. Suddenly, instead of scraping by, they might have $40,000 in retirement accounts, $10,000 in savings, and a little bit of equity in a home. Add it all up, subtract whatever debt is left, and they're knocking on the door of $100,000. But income growth isn't the only factor. Marriage has a surprisingly big impact on household net worth. Two incomes mean more earning power, but also more potential to save. According to data from the US Census Bureau, married couples are far more likely to own homes, invest in retirement accounts, and hit higher net worth milestones compared to singles. Of course, that depends on spending habits. Two people combining finances can double their strength, or double their weakness. If one partner comes in with heavy debt or a lifestyle of spending every dollar they earn, the wealth boost can turn into a financial drag. And then there's homeownership. Love it or hate it, buying a house is often the biggest push people get towards six-figure net worth. Why? Because every mortgage payment is partly going toward equity, the portion of the house you actually own. Plus, if the value of the property goes up, so does your net worth, at least on paper. For example, if you buy a home for $250,000 and after 5 years it's worth $300,000, that's a $50,000 gain, even before you consider how much principal you've paid down. Of course, there's a catch. Home equity is wealth, but it's not liquid. You can't sell one bedroom to pay off your credit card. That's why the first $100,000 in net worth is so tricky. A lot of it can be tied up in things you can't easily spend. And here's another little surprise. The first 6 figures take the longest to earn. Ask any seasoned investor and they'll tell you. The first $100,000 feels like climbing Everest. But once you're there, something magical happens. Compounding starts to do the heavy lifting. Your investments generate returns, and those returns themselves start earning returns. It's like rolling a snowball down a hill. At first, it's tiny and hard to pack together. But once it gets moving, it grows almost effortlessly. So let's step back for a second. The reason most people don't hit $100,000 net worth until their late 30s or early 40s isn't because they're lazy or irresponsible. It's because life has a way of stacking the odds against you in your 20s. Low income, high debt, high living costs. It's only once those pressures ease and you start combining higher income with consistent saving and investing that the picture really changes. Now, remember, these numbers are based on households, not individuals. That's an important distinction. If you're single in your 30s, your personal net worth might be lower than the household median, and that's perfectly normal. The median household figure includes families with 2 working adults, kids, maybe even some inherited assets. So don't panic if your personal numbers don't quite line up. Before we wrap up part 1, let's recap. Most people under 35 are nowhere near $100,000 in net worth. The typical household in that group is closer to $39,000. It's only between 35 and 44 that the median jumps past 6 figures. And the reasons are pretty straightforward. Higher income, paying down debt, getting married, and buying a home. That's the slow climb most people take, not the flashy millionaire stories you see online. In part 2, we're going to dig into the psychology behind wealth building. Why do people stall once they hit $100,000? Why do so many get stuck at that milestone and never see real compounding growth? And more importantly, how do you avoid that trap? Stay tuned. So, we've established that most people finally cross the $100,000 net worth milestone in their late 30s or early 40s. But here's the million-dollar question. Why do so many stall right there? Why do people hit 6 figures and then flatline? Let's break this down, because the reasons are both surprising and a little uncomfortable. The first thing we have to talk about is psychology. Hitting that $100,000 mark feels like winning a championship game. You've worked for years, clawed your way out of debt, saved consistently, maybe even bought your first home. Suddenly, your financial picture looks solid, and that's where the danger creeps in: comfort. See, most people treat the 6-figure net worth as the "I've made it" moment. And once you feel like you've made it, the urgency fades. You start loosening the budget, splurging on things that make you look wealthy: new cars, bigger homes, vacations that cost more than your emergency fund. In other words, lifestyle creep sneaks in. The numbers back this up. According to data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, US households on average spend about $70,000 a year. And a significant portion of that goes toward housing and transportation, 2 categories that get upgraded the moment people feel richer. That $400 car payment turns into $700. The modest starter home turns into a 3,000 square foot house with higher property taxes, maintenance, and insurance. On paper, your net worth might still look okay, but your financial momentum is gone. Here's the key problem. A lot of that first $100,000 is tied up in what I call paper wealth. That means assets that look good in a snapshot, but don't actually grow by themselves. Home equity is the classic example. Let's say you bought a house for $300,000, and after a few years, it's worth $360,000. Great, your net worth went up $60,000. But did you actively invest that money? No, the market did the work for you, and it may not do it again at the same pace. This is where people get stuck. They think they're building wealth, but really they're sitting on wealth. There's a big difference. True financial growth comes from compounding assets, things like retirement accounts, index funds, dividend stocks, or even a business that generates cash flow. These are assets that not only grow, but accelerate over time. Compounding is like rolling that snowball we talked about earlier. The bigger it gets, the faster it grows. But here's the catch. If you stop adding snow, meaning if you stop investing, your snowball just sits there. Let me give you an example. Say you reach $100,000 net worth mostly through home equity. You feel good, you relax, and instead of investing, you upgrade your car and spend more on travel. Over the next 10 years, your home appreciates a little and your net worth creeps up to $150,000. Meanwhile, someone else in the same position keeps investing $500 a month into a simple S&P 500 index fund. With an average annual return of about 7%, that person's $500 monthly contributions turn into over $85,000 in just 10 years, on top of whatever they already had invested. That's the snowball effect in action. See the difference? One person's wealth barely moved. The other person's wealth accelerated, even though both started at the same $100,000 milestone. That's why the first 6 figures is such a crossroads. What you do next determines whether your wealth keeps compounding or stalls out. Now, here's another wrinkle. A lot of people underestimate just how much debt drags down their future wealth. Student loans, car loans, and especially credit card debt can quietly eat away at your net worth growth. The Federal Reserve reported that in 2023, total credit card debt in the US hit a record $1 trillion. And with interest rates often above 20%, that's a financial anchor, pulling people backward even as they try to move forward. Think about it this way. If you have $5,000 in credit card debt at 20% interest, you're paying $1,000 a year just to service that debt, money that could have been compounding in an investment account. That's why eliminating high-interest debt isn't just about feeling less stressed. It's literally the difference between stalling at $100,000 and blasting past it. And let's not forget about inflation. Prices creep up every year, and if your money is sitting idle in a savings account earning 0.5%, you're actually losing purchasing power. According to the US Bureau of Labor Statistics, average inflation in 2022 was about 6.5%. That means if you left $10,000 in cash under your mattress or in a low-yield account, it was effectively worth only $9,350 a year later in terms of what it could buy. Ouch! So when people celebrate hitting 6 figures but don't keep investing, they're quietly falling behind without even realizing it. It's like running on a treadmill. You feel like you're moving, but you're staying in the same place. Now, let's circle back to something we touched on earlier: household versus individual net worth. Remember, the Federal Reserve's numbers are based on households, not individuals. That means a dual-income couple in their late 30s with a house and retirement accounts might pull the average up, while single individuals in the same age group are still struggling to get there. So, if you're watching this and thinking, wait, I'm 33 and I'm nowhere near $100,000, don't panic. The data shows you're actually in the majority. The real takeaway here isn't about comparing yourself to others. It's about recognizing that $100,000 isn't the finish line. It's the starting line for compounding growth. It's the stage where you decide whether your money will just sit in assets that make you feel wealthy, or whether you'll put it to work in assets that build momentum. So here's the recap for part 2. Most people stall at 6 figures because of 3 big traps: lifestyle creep, over-reliance on paper wealth like home equity, and not prioritizing compounding investments. Add in the drag of debt and the silent bite of inflation, and it's easy to see why wealth growth stalls out for so many. But here's the good news. If you recognize those traps, you can avoid them. The decision to keep investing, keep saving, and keep compounding is what separates people who plateau from people who eventually hit $500,000, $1 million, or more. In part 3, we're going to talk strategy. How exactly do you move from $100,000 to serious wealth? What practical steps can you take? no matter where you're starting from, to make compounding work for you. That's where we'll tie it all together. Alright, so by now we've figured out when people typically hit $100,000 net worth, and why so many stall once they get there. Now comes the most important part. How do you actually keep building? How do you go from that first 6 figures to serious wealth, the kind that snowballs faster than you can keep up with? Let's break it down step by step. The first thing you need to understand is this. Your first $100,000 is built mostly through hard work and discipline. Saving aggressively, paying down debt, living below your means, that's the grind stage. But once you've crossed that milestone, the game shifts. From here on, compounding should become your best friend. Think about it like planting a tree. At first, you're watering, fertilizing, making sure it doesn't get eaten by pests. Growth feels painfully slow. But once the roots are deep, the tree starts growing on its own. Compounding is those roots. Once you hit 6 figures, every additional dollar invested has a multiplier effect. That's when wealth stops crawling and starts sprinting. So, how do you make compounding work for you? Start with investing. And I'm not talking about trying to pick the next Tesla or gamble on crypto. I mean consistent, boring, reliable investing. According to data from Vanguard, over a 30-year period, 88% of actively managed mutual funds underperform the market. Translation, even the experts usually can't beat a simple index fund. That's why putting money into broad, low-cost index funds like the S&P 500 is often one of the smartest moves you can make. Let's run some numbers. Say you've got $100,000 saved and you invest it in the S&P 500, which historically averages around 7% after inflation. Without adding another dime, that money could grow to nearly $200,000 in 10 years. Add just $500 a month in contributions, and suddenly you're looking at over $350,000 in the same time frame. That's the snowball effect in action. But investing isn't the only lever. Let's talk about income. Because here's the truth. You can only cut expenses so far. There's a ceiling to frugality, but there's no ceiling on how much you can earn. This is where skills, career growth, and even side hustles come into play. The Federal Reserve's data shows a clear pattern. Households in the top 10% of wealth almost always have higher incomes, not because they skipped lattes, but because they found ways to increase their earning power. That might mean negotiating a raise, switching careers, or building a business on the side. Every extra dollar you earn and invest accelerates the compounding process. And don't underestimate debt management. Remember that $1 trillion in US credit card debt we mentioned earlier? Carrying high-interest debt while trying to build wealth is like filling a bucket with water while there's a hole in the bottom. The faster you patch the hole by paying off credit cards, personal loans, and even aggressively tackling student loans, the faster your wealth can grow. Now, let's touch on one of the most overlooked aspects of wealth: liquidity. It's one thing to have a net worth of $100,000, but if $90,000 of that is tied up in your home, you don't actually have much flexibility. That's why balancing home equity with liquid assets like stocks, bonds, and cash savings is so important. Liquidity gives you options. It keeps you from going further into debt when emergencies strike, and it allows you to jump on opportunities like investing when the market dips. And here's a mindset shift that's worth repeating. Don't confuse looking rich with being wealthy. A leased luxury car and designer clothes might look good on Instagram, but they don't build momentum. True wealth is often invisible. It's the investments you don't show off, the retirement account statements, the brokerage balances, the compound interest quietly doing its job behind the scenes. Another factor, patience. Compounding takes time. The problem is, we live in a culture of instant gratification. If an investment doesn't double in a year, people get bored and chase the next shiny object. But wealth isn't built that way. According to Fidelity, investors who simply stayed invested through the 2008 financial crisis, when the market dropped nearly 40%, ended up recovering and growing their wealth far more than those who panicked and sold. The lesson? Time in the market beats timing the market. So let's recap the practical playbook for going beyond $100,000. Keep investing consistently. especially in broad index funds. Focus on increasing your income instead of only cutting expenses. Eliminate high-interest debt as quickly as possible. Balance illiquid assets like home equity with liquid ones. Stay patient, stay invested, and don't chase the quick wins. Now remember, everyone's timeline is different. Some will hit $100,000 in their early 30s, others in their 40s. Some will grow from there steadily, others will stumble. But the truth is, wealth isn't a straight line. It's a series of decisions. Every raise you negotiate, every dollar you invest instead of spend, every debt you pay off, that's one more push on the snowball.